Tonight, you'll quietly step behind the heavy wooden doors of a medieval monastery, a place where silence was treasured. Every hour followed the ringing of a bell, and ordinary people willingly gave up wealth, comfort, and even their own names. But what was a single day inside these peaceful stone walls really like? Dim the lights, settle into a comfortable place, and let the noise of the modern world slowly drift away. Tonight, we're traveling back nearly 800 years to spend an entire day inside a medieval monastery. We'll walk softly through candlelit hallways, listen to ancient chants echo across stone chambers, and discover the quiet routines that shaped countless lives across medieval Europe. Long before the first hint of dawn touched the hills of medieval Europe, the monastery was wrapped in deep, velvety darkness. The moon hung quietly overhead, casting a pale silver glow across thick stone walls that had stood for generations. Beyond the monastery gates, forests rested in silence, villages slept peacefully beneath thatched roofs, and only the occasional hoot of an owl disturbed the stillness of the night. Inside the monastery, the air felt cool throughout the year. The stone walls, though strong and protective, held onto the chill of every season. Even during summer, the halls remained pleasantly cold, while winter transformed them into places where every breath became visible in the candlelight. The monks slept in simple quarters, far removed from the comfort many of us know today. Their beds were little more than sturdy wooden frames covered with straw-filled mattresses. A rough wool blanket offered modest warmth, and a small wooden pillow, or sometimes no pillow at all, supported their heads. Luxury was carefully avoided, for comfort was believed to distract the soul from its higher purpose. For a few precious hours, the monastery rested. Dozens of monks lay quietly in neat rows, their steady breathing blending into the silence of the great building. Candles had long since burned low, leaving only darkness and the faint scent of beeswax lingering in the air. Then, without warning, the silence was gently broken. A single monastery bell echoed through the sleeping halls. Its deep, steady tone rolled across the courtyard, bounced from ancient stone walls and drifted into every chamber. There were no clocks beside the beds, no glowing screens, no alarms set for the morning. Time itself was measured by the sound of bells. It was often around 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. For most people living in nearby villages, these were the deepest hours of sleep. But inside the monastery, the day had already begun. One by one, the monks quietly opened their eyes. There was no rushing, no conversation, and no complaints about the early hour. Rising before dawn had become part of the rhythm of their lives. Many had followed this routine for decades, until waking in darkness felt as natural as the sunrise itself. The room remained almost perfectly silent. The Rule of Saint Benedict, the guide that shaped life in many monasteries, placed great value on silence. Words were used carefully and only when necessary. The quiet was not meant as punishment, but as an invitation to listen, not to the outside world, but to one's own thoughts and prayers. Slowly, each monk folded his blanket, straightened his simple bed, and prepared for the first gathering of the day. Before entering the chapel, many washed their faces and hands using cold water drawn from wells or stone basins. During the harsh winters of northern Europe, that water could be icy enough to sting the skin. There were no heated bathrooms or steaming showers waiting to soften the morning. The cold served a purpose. It awakened the body completely and reminded the monks that comfort was temporary, while discipline was everlasting. After washing, each monk carefully dressed in his familiar woolen habit. The thick robe, tied with a simple rope belt, was practical rather than fashionable. Its coarse fabric scratched the skin at times, another quiet reminder that humility often required accepting small discomforts without complaint. A candle flickered somewhere down the hallway. Soon another appeared. Then another. Soft golden light slowly filled the dark corridors as monks walked calmly toward the church. Their sandals whispered across worn stone floors polished smooth by countless footsteps over hundreds of years. No one hurried. No one spoke. Only the gentle crackle of candle flames and the distant ringing of the bell accompanied their slow procession through the monastery. The chapel waited in peaceful darkness. As each monk entered, he bowed his head before taking his place in the wooden choir stalls. The candles illuminated only small circles of warm light, leaving the high ceiling hidden in shadow above. Then, almost together, the first prayers of the night began. Their voices rose gently into the still air, singing ancient Latin chants that echoed through the stone arches. The melodies were slow, steady, and calming. Every note lingered for a moment before fading into silence, creating an atmosphere that must have felt timeless even to those living in the Middle Ages. These early services, known as the night office or vigils, could last for quite some time. Psalms were recited, passages from scripture were read aloud, and moments of complete silence allowed each monk to reflect quietly. To modern ears, waking in the middle of the night every single day might sound exhausting. And in many ways, it certainly was. Monastic sleep was rarely uninterrupted. The pattern of rest was divided by scheduled prayers, meaning that monks often returned to bed for only a short while before another bell called them back to worship as dawn approached. Yet they believed this sacrifice held deep spiritual meaning. By interrupting sleep willingly, they reminded themselves that devotion required more than convenience. Every early morning, every cold stone floor beneath their feet, every sleepy step toward the chapel became a quiet act of discipline. They believed that by training the body to obey, the soul grew stronger. Discipline, humility, patience, and prayer were not separate parts of life. They were life itself. And so, while the world beyond the monastery walls remained wrapped in peaceful sleep, these quiet communities had already filled the darkness with prayer, reflection, and unwavering routine. Before most villages had even begun dreaming, the monastery had already been awake for hours. Imagine following a monk as daylight slowly reaches the monastery. The long hours of night prayer have come to an end. Outside, the eastern sky is beginning to soften from deep black to shades of pale blue and gentle gray. A thin layer of morning mist drifts across the fields beyond the monastery walls, while the first birds cautiously test the silence with quiet songs. The monastery is awake, but not in the hurried way we know today. No one rushes to beat traffic. No one checks a clock or hurries through breakfast. Instead, every movement follows a rhythm that has remained almost unchanged for generations, guided not by minutes, but by the steady ringing of bells. As the first light slips through narrow windows, the monks quietly leave the chapel. Their footsteps are soft against the smooth stone floors, worn by centuries of careful walking. Their woolen robes sway gently with each step, and the only sounds are the whisper of cloth and the distant chirping of birds welcoming the new day. Soon, another bell rings. It is not a signal of urgency, but an invitation to begin the day's work. Each monk already knows his responsibilities. There is little need for discussion. Years of routine have taught everyone exactly where they belong. In the monastery kitchen, warmth slowly replaces the chill of the morning. A baker gently feeds dry pieces of oak into the great stone oven. Tiny sparks dance upward before disappearing into the darkness of the chimney. Dough prepared the evening before has rested through the night, and now it is shaped into simple round loaves before being placed carefully inside the glowing oven. Gradually, a comforting aroma begins to spread through the building. The smell of fresh bread drifts along the hallways, mixing with the faint scent of burning firewood and warm grain. For many monks, this familiar fragrance is one of the quiet joys of each new morning, a small reminder that even simple food can be received with gratitude. Nearby, other monks prepare a humble breakfast. There are no elaborate feasts waiting on polished tables. A typical meal might include coarse bread, a little cheese, perhaps some porridge, and watered wine or weak ale, which was often safer to drink than untreated water. On certain days, fresh apples or dried fruits might appear, while meat was usually reserved for the sick or for special occasions. The meal is plain, but it is enough. Beyond the kitchen doors, the monastery gardens slowly awaken beneath the rising sun. Tiny drops of dew sparkle upon blades of wet grass, catching the morning light like countless little diamonds. Bees drift lazily from flower to flower, gathering nectar among lavender, rosemary, sage, mint, and countless other herbs carefully cultivated by the monks. These gardens were far more than beautiful places. They were living pharmacies. Long before modern hospitals existed, monasteries became centers of healing. The monks carefully studied medicinal plants, learning which herbs might soothe a fever, calm an upset stomach, ease a headache, or help clean a wound. Generations of practical knowledge were preserved and passed from one monk to another with remarkable care. As one monk gently trims herbs for the infirmary, another kneels to remove weeds from vegetable beds filled with onions, beans, cabbage, and carrots. Every plant is valuable, and every harvest helps feed both the monastery and the travelers who arrive seeking shelter. Nearby, another group quietly tends to the animals. The chickens eagerly gather around as grain is scattered across the yard. Sheep graze peacefully beyond a low stone wall. A patient ox waits beside a wooden cart, while cows are milked with practiced hands. Cats wander silently between the barns, always alert for mice that might threaten the monastery's precious stores of grain. Even these ordinary chores are performed with quiet attention. The work itself is considered a form of prayer. Inside the monastery, another kind of labor begins. A monk picks up a simple broom made from bundled twigs and carefully sweeps the long stone corridors. Dust is gently brushed toward open doorways, while fallen leaves carried in by sandals are gathered without haste. Every clean hallway reflects the belief that caring for one's surroundings is another way of honoring God. In another building lies one of the monastery's most remarkable rooms, the scriptorium. Sunlight now pours gently through tall windows, providing enough light for careful writing. Here, skilled monks sit at sturdy wooden desks, each holding a goosefeather quill carefully dipped into dark ink. With extraordinary patience, they begin copying books by hand. Every letter is formed slowly. Every sentence is checked with care. A single mistake might require hours of correction. Some manuscripts take months to complete. Others require several years. The silence inside the scriptorium is almost complete, broken only by the faint scratching of quills across smooth parchment. While one monk copies sacred scripture, another carefully decorates the margins with delicate vines, colorful flowers, tiny birds, or brilliant sheets of gold leaf that shimmer whenever sunlight touches the page. These books are among the greatest treasures the monastery possesses. Elsewhere, another bell rings across the courtyard. Its familiar voice echoes through gardens, workshops, kitchens, and fields. The sound gently reminds every monk that another hour has passed. For centuries, these bells served as the monastery's heartbeat, quietly guiding work, prayer, study, and rest throughout every season of the year. Eventually, breakfast is served. The monks enter the dining hall in silence and take their places at long wooden tables. Bowls and cups are placed carefully before them, but conversation does not begin. Instead, while everyone eats, one monk stands at a raised lectern near the front of the room. He opens a large handwritten Bible or another religious text and begins reading aloud. His calm voice fills the hall as the others quietly eat their bread and porridge. There is no idle conversation. No laughter echoes from table to table. Only the gentle sound of turning pages, the soft footsteps of those serving the meal, and the steady voice reading scripture accompany breakfast. For the monks, nourishing the body and nourishing the soul happen together. As the meal ends, bowls are quietly collected, tables are cleaned, and each monk returns once again to his daily task. The sun now rises fully above the monastery walls, warming the gardens, brightening the stone buildings, and revealing a peaceful world already alive with quiet purpose. Without hurry, without noise, and without wasting a single hour, another medieval morning gently unfolds. As the morning continues, leave behind the gardens, kitchens, and busy courtyard for a moment, and follow a narrow stone staircase that winds upward through the heart of the monastery. The air grows quieter with every step. Sunlight filters through small arched windows, painting soft rectangles of light across ancient stone walls. The sounds of chickens in the yard and bells in the distance slowly fade away until only silence remains. At the end of the corridor stands a thick wooden door. Beyond it lies one of the greatest treasures of the medieval world, the monastery library. To modern eyes, it might seem surprisingly modest. There are no towering bookshelves stretching from floor to ceiling, no thousands of colorful book spines, and certainly no glowing computer screens. Instead, sturdy wooden shelves hold a small collection of precious handwritten volumes, each one valued more highly than almost anything else inside the monastery. In the Middle Ages, books were incredibly rare. Before the invention of the printing press in the 15th century, every single book had to be copied entirely by hand. There was no quicker way. If someone wanted another copy of a manuscript, a patient scribe had to write every page, every sentence, and every letter from beginning to end. For that reason, a single book could take months, or even several years, to complete. Each volume represented thousands of careful movements, countless hours of concentration, and remarkable dedication. Some books were considered so valuable that they were fastened to shelves with long iron chains. This may sound unusual today, but the chains were not meant to imprison knowledge. They were there to protect it. A beautifully written manuscript could cost as much as a comfortable house or a small piece of farmland. Losing even one book would have been an enormous loss to the entire community. The chains allowed scholars to study the books while preventing them from accidentally disappearing. Just beyond the library is another extraordinary room, the scriptorium. Here, silence becomes almost complete. Several monks sit beside tall windows where the daylight is brightest. They work at simple wooden desks, each carefully arranged with sheets of smooth parchment, small knives for trimming quills, tiny containers of ink, rulers, and delicate brushes. No one speaks. Only the gentle scratching of quills gliding across parchment can be heard. It is one of the quietest sounds imaginable. The monks begin by preparing their writing tools. Rather than using metal pens, they write with goose feathers. Each feather is carefully trimmed with a sharp knife until its tip becomes fine enough to produce graceful lines of ink. As the feather slowly wears down during hours of writing, it must be trimmed again to keep every letter neat and consistent. The ink itself comes from nature. One of the most common recipes begins with small round growths found on oak trees, known as oak galls. These curious little spheres are formed when tiny insects lay their eggs in the tree. The galls are gathered, crushed into powder, mixed with water and iron salts, and transformed into a rich, dark ink. Many manuscripts written with oak gall ink remain remarkably clear even after hundreds of years. In many cases, the words written by those medieval monks can still be read today. Every page demands extraordinary patience. There are no shortcuts. Every capital letter is carefully shaped. Every sentence is measured. Every line is kept perfectly straight. Even a small mistake can spoil an entire page of costly parchment. As one monk quietly copies the text, another begins a different kind of work. He is an illuminator. Instead of writing words, he transforms the manuscript into a work of art. Tiny vines curl around the borders of the page. Brilliant blue flowers bloom beside golden initials. Birds, lions, rabbits, dragons, and graceful leaves appear among the decorative patterns, each painted with astonishing precision. Then comes the most dazzling detail of all, gold leaf. Sheets of gold are beaten so thin that they almost float when lifted. The illuminator gently breathes to steady his hands before placing the delicate gold onto carefully prepared sections of the page. When sunlight touches these golden decorations, the manuscript seems to glow from within. These magnificent books become known as illuminated manuscripts because the shimmering gold appears to illuminate the page itself. They are not simply books. They are masterpieces, but monasteries preserve far more than beautiful artwork. They preserve knowledge itself. Within these walls, monks patiently copy not only religious writings, but also works of history, philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and classical literature from ancient Greece and Rome. Many of the writings we know today by authors such as Aristotle, Virgil, and Cicero survived only because generations of monks carefully copied them by hand, century after century. Without their quiet dedication, countless ancient books might have disappeared forever. Education is equally important inside the monastery. In one peaceful classroom, several young boys sit upon simple wooden benches. Some are preparing to become monks. Others have been sent by nearby families to receive an education that few people in medieval Europe could obtain. A kindly teacher slowly traces letters onto a wax tablet while the boys carefully repeat the alphabet. They learn to read. They learn to write. They memorize prayers, study Latin, practice music for church services, and gradually discover the knowledge preserved inside the monastery's remarkable library. For many children, this is the beginning of a lifetime of learning. At a time when most ordinary people could neither read nor write, monasteries quietly became places where education continued to flourish. They protected books. They trained scholars. They copied knowledge from one generation to the next. In many ways, these peaceful stone buildings became the libraries of medieval Europe. As the afternoon sunlight gently shifts across the windows, another carefully written page is completed. A monk quietly lays down his goosefeather quill, allowing the fresh ink to dry. One more page has been added. One more small piece of human knowledge has been preserved for the future. And though he cannot possibly know it, his patient work will still be read hundreds of years later by people living in a world he could never have imagined. As the afternoon settles gently over the monastery, life continues at the same calm and measured pace. The warmth of the sun reaches into the cloister garden, and long shadows begin to stretch across the worn stone paths. It is easy to imagine that life here is peaceful simply because it is quiet. But beneath that quietness lies a remarkable level of discipline. Almost every part of a monk's day is guided by a set of instructions known as the Rule of Saint Benedict. Written in the 6th century by Saint Benedict of Nursia, this guide was not simply a list of rules. It was a way of living that shaped thousands of monasteries across medieval Europe for centuries. Rather than encouraging extreme hardship, the rule sought balance, combining prayer, honest work, study, humility, and community into a steady rhythm of daily life. To a visitor, some of its customs might seem surprisingly strict. One of the most noticeable is silence. Silence is treasured inside the monastery, not because conversation is forbidden altogether, but because words are believed to carry great weight. Unnecessary talking is discouraged. During certain hours, especially at night and during meals, complete silence is expected. Imagine walking through the monastery now. You pass several monks working side by side in the garden. One trims herbs, another gathers vegetables, a third repairs a wooden fence. No one speaks. Instead, they communicate with small gestures, gentle nods, or simple hand signals that everyone understands. The quiet allows each person to remain focused, and many believe it helps them listen more carefully to nature, to prayer, and to their own thoughts. Another important practice is confession. From time to time, each monk reflects honestly on his actions, admitting mistakes and asking forgiveness. These moments are not intended to bring shame, but to encourage humility. No matter how experienced a monk becomes, he is reminded that learning and self-improvement never truly end. Food, too, is approached with moderation. Throughout the year, many monasteries observe periods of fasting. Meals become smaller and simpler. Meat from four-legged animals is often avoided except for those who are elderly or ill. Bread, vegetables, beans, fish where available, and humble soups become the center of the table. The purpose is not punishment. Instead, fasting reminds the monks to appreciate simple blessings and to avoid becoming attached to luxury. Of course, even in such peaceful communities, mistakes sometimes happen. Perhaps someone arrives late for prayer. Perhaps another monk speaks when silence has been requested. Under the Rule of Saint Benedict, punishments are generally intended to correct rather than humiliate. A monk might be asked to eat separately for a time, perform additional duties, or quietly reflect upon his actions before rejoining the community. The goal is always restoration, helping each person return to the shared rhythm of monastic life. Another rule surprises many modern visitors. Monks own almost nothing personally. Their robes, books, tools, and even their beds belong to the monastery rather than to the individual. If a monk needs something, a new pair of sandals, a blanket, or writing supplies, he asks the abbot or another appointed brother. Living without personal possessions reminds everyone that the community is more important than individual wealth. At night, many monks sleep fully clothed. Their simple woolen habit remains on, partly because the buildings are often bitterly cold, and partly because they are expected to rise quickly when the night bell rings for prayer. There is little time for comfort when the rhythm of worship continues through the darkness. Winter brings its own challenges. Snow gathers outside the monastery walls. Cold winds slip through narrow windows despite heavy wooden shutters. Water in stone basins can freeze before sunrise. The thick stone buildings that offer protection in summer often feel icy during the colder months. Fires provide warmth in certain rooms, but many parts of the monastery remain chilly throughout the season. Even so, daily life continues. The bells still ring, the prayers still rise, the gardens are prepared for spring, the books continue to be copied. The rhythm rarely changes, yet monasteries are not closed to the outside world. Quite the opposite. A tired traveler approaching the gates after days on muddy roads is usually welcomed with kindness. Pilgrims, merchants, and even strangers with no money are often offered food, a warm place to sleep, and clean water before continuing their journey. Many monasteries consider hospitality a sacred responsibility. To care for a stranger is, in their eyes, an act of service. The same compassion is shown to the sick. Small infirmaries inside the monastery care not only for aging monks, but sometimes for local villagers as well. Shelves hold carefully prepared herbal remedies, while experienced brothers tend fevers, clean wounds, and provide simple comforts to those in need. Centuries before modern hospitals became common, these quiet communities often served as places of healing. History also reminds us that monasteries did not always live in peace. One famous example comes from Lindisfarne, a monastery on a small island off the northeast coast of England. In the year 793, Viking ships appeared unexpectedly from the sea. The peaceful monks who had devoted their lives to prayer and study suddenly found themselves facing fierce raiders. Buildings were looted, treasures were carried away, and the attack shocked Christian Europe. Many historians remember it as one of the events that marked the beginning of the Viking Age, yet the story did not end there. Although Lindisfarne suffered terribly, monastic communities elsewhere continued their work. Books were copied, children were taught, travelers were welcomed. Generation after generation, monasteries endured despite war, hardship, harsh winters, and uncertainty. As the afternoon slowly fades toward evening, the monastery remains much as it was at dawn. Its bells continue to mark the passing hours. Its quiet halls echo with steady footsteps. And behind every simple rule lies a single purpose: to shape a life of patience, humility, service, and peace, one calm day at a time. As the afternoon quietly slips toward evening, this is a good moment to pause and reflect on what life inside a medieval monastery was truly like. Over the centuries, stories, paintings, and films have created many lasting images of monks. Some are surprisingly accurate, while others leave out much of what made monastic life so remarkable. Let us gently separate a few of the most common myths from reality. Myth: monks spent every hour praying. It is easy to imagine monks kneeling in church from sunrise until sunset, their days filled with nothing but prayer and hymns. The reality was far more balanced. Prayer was certainly the heart of monastic life, but it was only one part of each day. The Rule of Saint Benedict encouraged a rhythm known by the Latin phrase ora et labora, pray and work. After morning prayers, monks baked bread, cultivated gardens, harvested crops, repaired roofs, cared for animals, prepared meals, welcomed travelers, copied manuscripts, educated children, and looked after the sick. Their daily work was never considered separate from their faith. Instead, every task, whether sweeping a hallway or planting vegetables, was seen as another form of quiet devotion. When we picture monasteries today, we often imagine perfect silence, beautiful gardens, and lives untouched by the troubles of the outside world. Reality was often much more uncertain. Throughout the Middle Ages, monasteries faced many of the same hardships as nearby towns and villages. Wars swept across kingdoms. Political struggles changed rulers and borders. Fires sometimes destroyed libraries that had taken generations to build. Crop failures brought famine. Diseases spread through entire regions. And from time to time, raiders appeared without warning. Even behind thick stone walls, monks could never completely escape the challenges of medieval life. Yet what is perhaps most remarkable is not that hardship reached them. It is that they quietly rebuilt again and again. Libraries were restored, gardens were replanted, churches were repaired. The bells continued to ring. Life moved forward with remarkable patience. Myth. Every monastery looked exactly the same. At first glance, monasteries across Europe may appear very similar. Stone churches, cloister gardens, sleeping quarters, libraries, dining halls. But each community developed its own traditions. A monastery in the snowy mountains of Switzerland lived differently from one surrounded by vineyards in southern France. Communities in England adapted to rainy weather and coastal winds. Italian monasteries enjoyed warmer climates and different local foods. Some monasteries became famous for scholarship. Others focused on farming. Some welcomed large numbers of pilgrims, while others remained quiet places of contemplation hidden deep within forests or valleys. Different religious orders also followed slightly different customs. Although many were inspired by the Rule of Saint Benedict, later communities, such as the Cistercians or Carthusians, emphasized different ways of living, each seeking simplicity, prayer, and service in their own unique manner. No two monasteries were entirely alike. Each reflected both its faith and the landscape that surrounded it. Myth. Medieval monasteries rejected learning. This is perhaps one of the greatest misunderstandings of all. Far from turning away from knowledge, monasteries became its careful guardians. Inside peaceful scriptoria, monks copied not only Bibles but also works of history, medicine, philosophy, astronomy, mathematics, music, and classical literature. Without printing presses, every page required extraordinary patience. Every letter was written by hand. Every illustration was painted with care. Every completed book represented months, or sometimes years, of dedicated work. Many ancient Greek and Roman writings survived only because medieval monks believed they were worth preserving. Generation after generation, they quietly copied manuscripts that might otherwise have disappeared forever. In doing so, monasteries became some of Europe's first great libraries. They protected learning through centuries of uncertainty. They educated children. They welcomed scholars. They preserved history. And although few of those patient scribes could have imagined the future, their work still speaks to us today, hundreds of years later. Perhaps that is one of the monastery's greatest legacies, not simply the buildings of stone, but the quiet belief that knowledge is a gift worth protecting. Now the day gently comes to its close. The western sky begins to glow with soft shades of amber, rose, and pale lavender as the sun slowly sinks behind distant hills. Warm light touches the monastery walls one final time before slipping quietly into evening. Across the courtyard, the familiar bell rings once more. Its deep, peaceful sound drifts through gardens, across fields, and into the surrounding countryside. The day's work is finished. Monks slowly return from the gardens carrying woven baskets now nearly empty. Others carefully close the heavy wooden doors of the library. The kitchen grows quiet as the last bowls are washed and stacked upon wooden shelves. One by one, candles are lit throughout the monastery. Their gentle flames flicker against ancient stone, filling the halls with warm golden light that dances softly upon the walls. The monks gather again inside the chapel. Their evening prayers rise slowly into the still air, carried by calm voices that have followed the same melodies for centuries. There is no hurry, only gratitude for another day that has quietly passed. Outside, birds settle among the branches of old oak trees. Their songs become fewer and softer, until only the occasional gentle chirp remains. A cool evening breeze moves through the cloister garden, carrying the delicate fragrance of lavender, rosemary, and freshly watered herbs. The pathways are nearly empty now. Only the faint sound of soft footsteps echoes briefly before fading into silence. In one quiet room, a small fire glows peacefully inside a stone hearth. Its gentle crackling fills the space with comforting warmth. Beyond the monastery walls, the first stars begin appearing overhead. Soon the moon rises once again, bathing the peaceful garden in cool silver light. The flowers rest quietly beneath the night sky. The herbs sway almost imperceptibly in the breeze. Everything feels calm. Everything feels still. Although centuries have passed, the quiet rhythm of monastery life still feels strangely familiar, a gentle reminder that even in a noisy world, moments of silence have always carried extraordinary peace. Perhaps that is why these ancient places continue to capture our imagination, not because life there was easy, but because, amid uncertainty, they created small islands of calm where work, learning, kindness, and reflection lived side by side. And for just a little while tonight, we have been fortunate enough to walk quietly among them. Thank you for joining tonight's peaceful journey through a medieval monastery.